Welcome, everyone. I guess this is the 6th and final Clean Energy Connections discussion that has been hosted by Solar One and New York City ACRE, which is sort of an unmentionable acronym which involves renewable energy and economy and, among other things. Somebody can fill me in on what it stands for. But I think what's amazing about this assemblage is this is really the public square for clean energy and clean tech in New York. And to bring people together with so many different ideas and different approaches is quite amazing. I expect to see some good synergies tonight. It's a very fitting evening to do this because somewhere outside these doors, there are probably 450,000 drivers idling in traffic, enduring just barely this perfect storm of entirely avoidable congestion events in New York City tonight, which is the night that the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree is being lit. It is the kickoff to the holiday shopping season. Of course, we have a presidential visit to add to the confusion and congestion on our streets. What a good night to talk about EVs. So the things that make New York City so troubling if you're a driver are density, our verticality. We're an archipelago, essentially, islands and one tiny piece of mainland. We have extremely high or disproportionately high liquid fuel costs. Those are all the sort of things that contribute to an environment that is so well positioned for EVs and the broader adoption of EVs. So what you have is a set of circumstances here which are beautiful for EVs, very complicated and complex for internal combustion engines. And you also have this amazing alignment of political will, public leadership, and private sector leadership, which has largely come to the consensus that for medium-duty hauling and short-haul delivery in this city, in these 5 boroughs, EVs represent a very viable solution. So you've got a political will, you've got private sector interest, you've got the investment community aligned, and of course you have all the optics of EVs and all the political elements that propel us in the direction of adopting EV fleets. So what we've got tonight is some of that leadership that's going to talk to you all, present some of their ideas, and perhaps help point us in the right direction where we go next. First, we have to do a little housekeeping, and this is the kind of housekeeping you do so the bank doesn't foreclose on the house and so they don't take away the kids. It's to thank our sponsors. And our sponsors tonight include NYCERDA, Con Edison, Loeb & Loeb, Green Tech Media, Young Professionals in Energy, and the New York Association for Energy Economics. And we want to thank them for their partnership, their engagement in this series, and it obviously would not be possible without them. I also want to reiterate, sounds good. And I want to level with you, and I'll level with Sarah. I'm bidirectional. This series is a bidirectional series. We want people to talk at the audience, talk at the folks who are going to be presenting on stage. They're going to be presented with questions from the audience. They're going to be presented with Twitter questions and questions from the live stream as well. It's very important for everyone here to be participants, to be engaged. You're not recipients of knowledge. You have to also share your own knowledge and ask some probing questions. So I'll repeat the important information here that folks in the audience can write down questions on index cards. Folks following this at home can look at the section right below the live stream and send their comments in or tweet them to us at CleanECNYC with the hashtag #CleanNRGX. I hope I got that right. So we're going to bring up Christina Ficicchia first. Christina Ficicchia is a friend of mine. She's an extraordinary human being. She's also a black belt in Taekwondo, so don't piss her off. Just softballs, please. And the way I describe Christina is she is the top of the funnel for information in this city and this region about clean fuels and alternative fuel vehicles and technology. She runs something called Clean Communities, New York City, Lower Hudson Valley Clean Communities. And what she's extraordinary at is finding resources and opportunities and plugging in the right institutions, the right players to partnerships and collaborations to fully take advantage of those opportunities to benefit the greater New York area. So she's an extraordinary career. I met her because she used to work for the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation. I'm a Bronx guy, and my great love is taking care and looking after the borough of the Bronx. And Christina has been someone who's been very involved in maintaining air quality in the Bronx and figuring out ways to improve the quality of life there. So among other things, she has also worked for Pratt Institute, and she serves on a number of boards, and she has been able to bring an enormous amount of resources, federal, state, and city, to bear on this very complicated and complex problem of air quality and dependence on imported oil and imported petroleum products. So let me bring up Christina Ficicchia. Come on up, Christina.
Thanks, Paul, for the very kind words, and don't be afraid. I'm out of practice, and I have not trained for a long time. So I'm Christina Ficicchia. I'm here representing our organization, which is, New York City and Lower Hudson Valley Clean Communities. And we are a nonprofit 501c3 organization that promotes alternative fuels and advanced vehicle technologies here in our region. We do this, do I have slides? No slides? Okay. You can run to the second slide. We do this primarily through three main things that we do. One is outreach events, educational workshops, and web-based information. So we really try to be that information resource for everyone in New York City on where to get, where and how to get information on alt fuels. Through grant-funded financial assistance to fleets. So these technologies are still really very expensive. So we try to help through different tax incentives, helping maneuver through those, different grant incentives that are available through the government, and just helping to try to make the economic case. Finally, and Paul was mentioning, we do a lot of building of public-private partnerships, which is, I think, the key in this arena right now. We really need to bring together the public and the private and figure out how to make this work, because it's in the best interest of everyone. Finally, we're here today to talk about electric vehicles, but we promote all types of alternative fuels and advanced vehicle technologies, so I don't want to leave any of them out. We do, particularly natural gas sometimes is a good solution for the heavier duty and for the larger loads that are being carried throughout the city, where electric vehicles sometimes makes the most sense for some of the shorter distances, and especially some of the delivery runs that happen here locally. So I think we're on the third slide. So in 2000, sorry, you can go back one slide. In 2010, we were able, as our coalition, and there's a whole bunch of logos here at the bottom of the different members that we have, and that's just a select number of members of a larger pool of stakeholders that are involved in our coalition. And it is because of these stakeholders and members that we are able to do the good work that we do. And with their help, we were able to displace 23 million gallons of petroleum in 2010, over 100,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. So in addition to being a local nonprofit, we're also designated by the US DOE to be a Clean Cities Coalition, which basically means that we have access to the US Department of Energy and also best practices across the nation from organizations that are similar to ours that have done projects like this to try to get an understanding of what worked and what didn't work. In addition, there's a lot of these different resources. I put this slide up here so that you had some resource to go to. Fueleconomy.gov, you go there always to go and compare your vehicles side by side. You can also go there and compare not only vehicle costs, but greenhouse gas emission reduction and other environmental benefits. You'll start to see at the AFDC website, the Alternative Fuel Data Center, you can do a station locator, so you can plug in your address and you'll be able to locate all of the electric vehicle charging stations within a 50-mile radius of the address you put in, or whatever radius you decide to put in. So there are all these resources that already exist. So I did want to kind of point that out. Next slide. On a regional level, just so again, we're kind of federal in one perspective, even though we're grassroots local, we do have that direct line from the federal. On a regional level, we're working with Transportation Climate Initiative and NYCERD, our state energy office, on a regional planning initiative for electric vehicle planning readiness through a grant from the US DOE. So you'll hear a lot more about that planning effort, and it is 11 Clean Cities Coalitions, as well as, actually I think 16 Clean Cities Coalitions across 11 states, and it's being managed between DC and New York City. So you hear plenty more about what that means in terms of how we're positioning different charging infrastructure and how we're going to share some of that network of resources. And next, I think in almost final slide, and then finally locally, and I'll pass it over to a more local person here in New York City. We're working with the New York City Department of Transportation and the New York City Mayor's Office, who's here today as well, on a specific readiness plan for New York City. There's going to be some web resources. We're going to be integrating some social media into that and just really provide resources for consumers and just some other partners we have just to show. And then my contact information for anyone that's interested in getting more involved with our organization, just having questions. Again, we're always here to be a resource. And thank you again for having me here. I'm going to turn it back, I think, to Paul, who's going to bring up someone from the city who can talk more locally. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. So why did the Dutch and the Algonquins before them settle in New York City? Why did they come to this archipelago? What's the answer? Great parks. The guy, you can laugh, it's all right. The guy who I'm going to bring up now is most of his career, we think of him as a parks guy. He's someone who came to the city of New York from Massachusetts with a newly minted degree from Harvard and really helped to transform the Parks Department's approach to fleet management, operations, management of resources and assets. And he's one of the guys who is a prime mover. When we talk about the outstanding leadership it takes to move the ball, to roll that stone up the hill, he's one of the guys who has figured out ways to bring resources to bear, to bring intelligence to bear, and to bring political will to bear to the challenge of transforming our fleets. Now, they say a fish swims from its head, and that's largely true, but Keith is sort of the tail that keeps propelling the city of New York towards clean fuel approach. He has a great team, but it's been his outstanding leadership. So I'm going to bring up Keith Kerman, and I will tell you a couple of things. One of the enduring enigmas about Keith Kerman is that nobody's ever seen him drive a vehicle. And yet, this is the guy who is the outstanding standard bearer for alternative fuel vehicles in this outstanding city. And he is a walker. He walks everywhere. You will never see him in a vehicle of any stripe. His alternative fuel vehicles of choice are his shoes. And among other things, he served 17 years with Parks and Recreation. He's most recently been Assistant Commissioner for Citywide Operations. I don't think this is a guy who needs too much introduction, but I will say a couple of other things. He wrote a book. He wrote the field, this is an author here, best-selling author. There's been at least 4,000 Parks Department employees who've read this book. Am I right?
That's generous.
2,500 Parks Department employees have read this book. It's called Field Operations Book. Random House? Yeah. I mean, all right. So what's important about Keith is he finds these niche projects. The marinas. He revitalized every marina in the city of New York. Now, who would have thought that we're a waterfront city? Well, Keith knew it because Parks Department has all this great waterfront. He figured out how to leverage it. But we all know him as the guy who's figured out how to reduce fuel and get our fleets to adopt new ways of propelling themselves. Keith Kerman, come on up.
All right, thank you, Paul. I don't know, was that a compliment to be the tail, not the head? I don't know about that. Though, if we have to compare shoes, I probably lose out in most cases, but not with you. All right. So, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me and having me here. I always enjoy coming over and talking on alternative fuels. Probably the thing I get to talk about the most, and it is the fun part of my job, and I'll tell you a little bit about my new job. I was at the Parks Department for most of my adult life, for 17 years, but I've just completed my first month as the Chief Fleet Officer for New York City. You might ask, what is the Chief Fleet Officer of New York City? That is what I'm trying to figure out. So if you have good ideas about that, if you might have the job posting, you could just get that to me. That'd be really, really helpful. All right, a quick, easy question for all of you. How many vehicles do you think the city of New York operates? A lot is correct. Anyone want to throw out a number who does not currently get a check from the city of New York? Which is probably very few here. Well,
22,000.
oh, that's a knowledgeable answer. No. No, he got the number. It's almost exactly right. It's a little bit between 26 and 27,000 vehicles. It's a big fleet. It's the largest public fleet in the United States. And it's really maybe the most well-known fleet in the world. I mean, is there anything more recognizable when you talk about cars than the New York City Police Department patrol vehicles, the Fire Department of New York City, the sanitation vehicles, and the Parks Department vehicles, because I have to pitch parks at all times. We will be passing a hat around for collections for parks afterwards, so please dig in deep. Okay. On behalf of Mayor Bloomberg, I'm Deputy Mayor Kaz Holloway and DCAS Commissioner Edna Handy. I do want to thank NYCERDA, Solar One, all my partners here, Paul, all my partners across ACRE and Christine. I've worked with this community for a long time, and it really is a community. No one is advancing alternative fuels alone. No one's advancing the electrical piece alone. We're all kind of in it together with nonprofits, with con eds, with fuel companies, with manufacturers of technologies, manufacturers of chargers. This is a case where it is going to be all of us advancing this aspect, this important aspect of American life together, or none of us doing it together. You know, what's the city's role? We can be a pretty big consumer, maybe the biggest consumer. You know, I mentioned how many vehicles. There are 27,000. They cross all the different agencies. The city has made a fairly major start in electric technology. We operate 4,400 hybrid gas electric vehicles or diesel electric vehicles, and you know, there's an investment in these Kenworth and Eaton technologies and diesel electric. We suspect that that is the largest such fleet in the country. If you know better, be quiet. But what we do know is even if it's not the largest, it's clearly the best. We've spent at least $130 million on just the hybrid and electric side of investments. So that's enough money to help move and sustain and grow a market. That's not to say how much we're doing for other technologies, compressed natural gas, for biodiesel, and the city is also investing in biodiesel and other technologies. Right now, we are kind of taking the position that you cannot choose a technology or a manufacturer yet. There is no kind of silver bullet. So we are pushing on all fronts that are viable, all fronts that work, all fronts that we believe will reduce emissions, that will kind of advance the cause, and we'll see. Let the marketplace determine what the long-term future of alternative fuels is, as long as it's better for the environment, better for the economy, ideally domestic. If we can do that, we're gonna be there. We are now taking, you know, we've invested heavily in the hybrids, and we have this very large fleet, which, by the way, is across all city agencies, the police department, the fire department, the sanitation department. It's not just, you know, my old parks department that's doing this. This is every agency involved in operating, investing, and using these technologies. We're now, you know, I think what probably is more dear to you all, making that next leap to all electrics and plug-in electrics. There are about 400 all-electric or plug-in electric vehicles that the city is currently operating. We are buying more. You know, obviously, we did make a big investment in the GM Volt, and I want to thank the GM Volt for offering me an opportunity to stay up late the last couple of nights, figuring out what's going on there. And if any of you can, you know, if any of you are involved in that matter, if you could kind of expedite the resolution of that so we can feel better about our next purchase order, I really appreciate that. I have that purchase order kind of in my pocket, and it might just stay there for a few days. But in fact, if you want to see, we are also investing in chargers. The city has 50 electric chargers that's put in. There's another 100 that we're putting in for our own use. In addition, through ACRE's work and a lot of others, we have helped support 50 public chargers being put in at public garages, and we're looking for additional opportunities to do that. you know, obviously there's two sides. You know, my main charge is how to move this the largest public fleet and make it a role model in this effort. But as well, we want to move and create this public infrastructure so that, you know, as a homeowner, as a business, you can start to invest equally in these technologies. It's an interesting technology. You know, the plug-in side has, usually we think about alternative fuel technologies and you think the city first. And we want to think the city first. But in a way, it might be, at the moment, a little bit easier to be a suburban homeowner and plug in than it is right now in the city. It's just the nature because you have to build this infrastructure. So we're working hard with a lot of you, and I think we're going to need everyone's help to do this. Certainly the Con Ed and the electrical infrastructure and the utilities. We're going to need private investment. The city is not going to roll out, you know, 500,000 chargers anytime soon. So it's going to have to be done on the private side. We're happy to lead it. We're happy to facilitate. ACRE will figure out how to just waive all those regulations that exist and put them in a basket. But the private side is going to have to do that investment. There are a few things that you might not know that the city is doing. The Department of Sanitation has an advanced environmental lab solely dedicated towards studying alternative fuels, testing them, determining whether they work and the benefits of them. This is at the Central Repair Shop in Queens. I didn't realize how involved it was myself till I started to get a little bit more involved in the citywide fleet. The police department is actively investing in alternative fuel technologies. The police department just made a deal to get all these electric pickup trucks. And we kind of said, oh, how'd the police department get all the, you know, wish the parks department were getting these pickup trucks? But they are so active and so interested that they are actually a little bit steps ahead of some of the agencies you might expect would be closer to that. We're working with the Taxi and Limousine Commission on a pilot of using the Nissan Leaf in 6 cases to be a taxi cab and to see if an all-electric taxi cab is a viable way to move forward. Imagine that future. And it's probably down the roads, but imagine a future where all the taxis in New York City were actually non-emitting. That would be pretty interesting. We're looking at the electric infrastructure. Strike that. We're looking at the regulations that govern electric infrastructure and how they can be streamlined to make the city as friendly as possible. Something that's dear to my heart that I can't say I figured out, but I have every intention. We're going to try and figure out how to get the Mr. Softy trucks and the other food vans in Union Square and to stop emitting. And every time I meet anybody I think has some piece of that, I start yapping about that topic. When I was at Parks, I kind of, the last couple of years, was trying to figure it out because most of them are concessions of the Parks Department. And in my new gig, I'm determined to figure it out. We're promoting a website, because everyone promotes a website, NYC.gov, Drive Electric. And I just want to say, you know, EVs offer very interesting challenges. And I'm kind of been on the forefront of thinking about these. They connect parking and fueling infrastructure, right? You know, gas stations and parking locations have no current real, you know, connection to each other or synergy. Well, in electric infrastructure, they could very well be the same things. They connect the auto mechanical trades and the electrical trades. Now, if you know anything about city government, those are very, very different things right now. Those are different unions, they're different rules, they're different trades. They don't work, they rarely even work in the same buildings. But if we're going to have a major electrical program, the electricians and the auto mechanics have to talk. But they do they separate vehicle emissions from tailpipe emissions, right? So now the tailpipe is not the place you look to figure out what the emissions criteria are for the vehicles. They're still emitting, they're still the generation of power, but now they're not in the same place. And of course, you substitute the battery for the most important invention of all, the internal combustion engine. And that's not a minor thing, as we're learning on the Volt side. That's not a minor change, and it's going to come with some bumps. So with that, I do want to just thank all of you. What I've learned in my 15 years of working on this, it's the people in the rooms. You know, we get to be a buyer, and we try and be the most aggressive and high-profile buyer we can. But it's always the people in the rooms like yourselves who are going to invent these technologies, advance them, test them, develop them, promote them. And you are the real people who are going to make this happen. What we're going to do is take your public tax dollars and hopefully be a lead implementer of them and help you do that. So I do want to thank all of you again. And now it is my pleasure to introduce David Leeds, who I just met in what they call the green room. And I assume they named that to make, an ex-Parks guy a little more comfortable. David directs the Smart Grid research practice at Green Tech Media. He has guest lectured at MIT, at Stanford, at the Wharton School of Business. I'll try and get him an invite to my alma mater. He has been quoted as an expert by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. His perspective pieces have appeared in a variety of publications, including Businessweek, Power Magazine, and Fortune. He is the author of the groundbreaking report, The Smart Grid, in 2010, which has been downloaded more than 10,000 times. I will download it to move that to a non-even number. His research focuses on the convergence of IT, telecom, and energy networks, and he is trying to develop really a smarter future and really look at the comprehensive grid infrastructure. And with that, now that he's here, I welcome him.
Thank you, Keith, for reading that long and laborious intro. Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm David Leeds, as Keith mentioned, and I lead the Smart Grid and EV research practice at GTM Research, part of Green Tech Media. And I guess this is an area we've been looking at for the last year and a half, primarily because from my vantage point, electric vehicles are considered, or many consider, including John Wellinghoff, who's the director of FERC, the killer app of the smart grid. And so, these massive appliances are soon coming to cities near us. And I think, there's a lot of things happening right now that are, as pointed out earlier, they're really exciting. We have the Leaf and the Volt, the first sort of commercial vehicle available early this year. And 2012 looks to be a time period where we'll have sort of 12 to 15 of the major OEMs releasing new cars. And this is sort of a major about face from, where GM and Toyota were just 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 years ago. And at the same time, as Paul mentioned, there's a major alignment of interest here to make electric transportation happen, and that includes utilities, governments, the private sector, and consumers, as we now have a possibility to present consumers alternatives to internal combustion engine vehicles, and the possibility as well of having lower fuel costs. So all of that, all these drivers and this sort of groundswell of green that's kind of merged into our consciousness over the past 5 years are supporting this. And I guess I want to kind of talk through, we've got an outstanding panel here, issues of infrastructure build out, consumer adoption, and since we're in NYC and this is an NYC event, NYC's preparation for this, and will we be a true leader in this field, or will the Chinese cities or, Northern Europe is actually looking very progressive on EVs right now, and states like Denmark are offering free electricity for their EV owners. So, the whole world is understanding the real value of these cars. So we'll talk about energy costs as well. And I also want to get into a little bit of policy and a little bit of considering the total cost of ownership of these cars, as they do today have a higher upfront cost. But I think the payoff over the long run is electricity costs that are well under the mark of what we pay for petrol and for diesel. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce the panel here. And we have joining us from Green Charge Networks, Brian Asparro, who's on my left here. And Brian is their chief financial officer. Next to him, we've got John Shipman. John is John's basically the lead at Con Edison, and it's a big job. And anyone in this room that's involved in electric vehicles in New York City knows John Shipman. So it's a pleasure and honor to have John on the panel. Next to John is Anatol Feygin. Anatol is the vice president and energy strategist at Loews Corporation. And finally, rounding out this great crew, we've got Brett Gipe. And Brett is with a company called Smith Electric Vehicles. And what Smith is doing, and this I think ties into the comments Keith just made, is Smith is doing electric vehicles not for consumers necessarily, or sort of one-off or individual consumers, but for fleet vehicles. And I think the business case for logistics companies like FedEx and like you know, UPS, where management science is the core of their business, really makes sense. So happy to have all these wonderful speakers on the panel, and thank you all for being here. I guess first I'll just let each of the speakers kind of take 2 or 3 minutes, or you know, as much time as you need, just to sort of introduce you know, what you're currently working on, and if possible, if you want to throw in you know, your sense of New York City's you know, role in the adoption of EVs, that'd be great. So Brian, I'll let you start.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Asparro, and I'm with a company called Green Charge Networks. We help utilities and customers better manage the distribution of electricity through software and systems. Main component of that system is a battery that we install at a facility. We work with customers, retailers, parking garages, with things like electric vehicle charging as on the outside of that to help customers manage and to charge cars. And I myself am still on the waiting list for a Nissan Leaf. I don't know when I'm going to get it. Hopefully I will. And believe in the adoption here in New York. There's a lot of challenges. Does anybody know how many gas stations there are in Manhattan? 48. Yeah, exactly. 48. Does anybody know how many electric vehicle charging spots there are in Manhattan? There's 40 electric vehicle charging spots in Manhattan as well, roughly, but it's changing. But there's a new paradigm shift in terms of charging, and a lot of the panelists will discuss about level 2, level 3, and how that works, and energy charges and costs. And we're getting into it with customers like 7-Eleven, Avis, and Central Parking, and you know, looking forward to being on the panel.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is John Shipman. I work at Con Edison, and I'm responsible for their EV programs. I've been involved with EVs for about 25 years with manufacturers building prototypes, field testing, running them in fleet operations. And I'm really excited that now there are products that are commercially available, from trucks to cars, and we're really looking forward to seeing how far we can move this wave through our city and advance the adoption of these things. So at Con Edison, we're focused on how do we most efficiently use the energy that's going to be required for these vehicles. It's just not a question of plugging them in. If you think about a fleet where you could have 100 or so vehicles in a location, you could have almost a megawatt of load just for charging. So those kind of loads need to be managed over time. So working with people like Green Charge Networks, we design systems and look at smart grid applications where we can intelligently use the energy that's available either through sun, battery storage, and the grid to manage that load in a fashion that lowers the cost for our customer, allows us to meet increasing demand for energy within the city, and at the same time helps clean up our air. So I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Hey, John, can I just jump in for 1 second and ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Being that you've got 25 years in EVs, what do you see about 2011, 2012 that's different from where we were 10, 15 years ago with, you know, earlier versions? What's changed? What's your sense of it? What are the drivers, and kind of what makes now different?
Well, the technology is much better. I mean, those first EVs 25 years ago were lead-acid battery technology, not much in the way of control systems. You had batteries that were flooded batteries that took water, and you had to manage that. So a lot of those things are gone. The manufacturers have done a lot of work in developing energy density in the battery systems, control systems that are miles above where they were before. And I think that's what makes it adaptable to the regular consumer.
Great. So even though we're all excited about EVs, and we have to recognize we're still just in the first generation of this sort of launch, I think it's really important to acknowledge that the technology is, you know, game ready today, and that's really exciting. All right. So Anatol, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, David. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. Very much looking forward to this discussion. As David mentioned, I'm with Loews Corporation. We are a publicly traded conglomerate. We have a number of investments in the energy space. We have 3 energy operating companies that we control. that are decidedly old economy, natural gas pipelines, offshore drilling, and natural gas exploration production. My role is across all of our energy efforts in the operating companies as well as on the investing side. We've made a number of investments in the electric vehicle space. Really, how we got here is through a set of fundamental beliefs or opinions, whatever you want to call them, one of which is that the North American natural gas price environment is going to be quite subdued for a long period of time, and that's going to lead to rather attractive electricity prices in the wholesale markets for the foreseeable future. With that as kind of one building block, we then saw the development of this current generation of electric vehicle space, and fundamentally believe that the technology is in many ways already superior to the internal combustion engine, and obviously in many ways is a century behind in terms of its development and capital commitment. And so we come to the space as private investors, providers of capital to opportunities that we think have a tremendous set of options, market penetration, and in many ways a lot of room for error, just given the set of conditions that we believe in, given the relatively low electricity prices and a very attractive fundamental economics. We will, of course, talk a lot about the implementation challenges and the penetration challenges with my esteemed members on this panel here, but we believe there's a tremendous opportunity, and as I said, we've made a number of investments in the electric vehicle space. So look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks. Brett?
Thanks, David. And as Anatol said, certainly looking forward to being part of this. Brett Gipe with Smith Electric Vehicles. We do commercial electric trucks. That's all we do. We're a very niche-oriented company. We think the New York market is obviously, and anybody who lives here or spends any time here knows there's a lot of trucks around here to take care of all the folks and all the business here in New York City. And we've got probably year and a half's worth of experience of having our trucks on the road already here in New York market. We think that this urban logistics depot-based market is one that is perfect for our applications, and we're excited about the opportunity to work with folks like Con Edison and help grow this business, and it's an exciting time to be here, I think, and we're glad to be part of the panel. That's
great. Well, let's just follow on that. I mean, I'll ask each of you, what is your sense of consumer interest, and how important and what part of that will be the fleet's role in kind of driving this market forward? So maybe, Brett, you could start and give me a sense of sort of lessons learned. And
yeah, well, just real quickly on that, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, we think that it's totally different than the consumer market. Obviously, as we were mentioning, there's 40 charging stations already around New York, but there's probably not that many electric vehicles that are the Leafs and the Volts and things out there yet. Because there's a lot of things that Con Ed and everybody else has to consider in building that infrastructure. But for those commercial electric vehicles, I mean, these are vehicles that go back home every night. They have the facilities there already. These companies have the wherewithal to put in their infrastructure. They can adopt a lot quicker, at least certainly we think so. And it's one that will, I think, help drive the rest of the market then. So by, focusing on that fleet market, I think that's going to help bring everybody else along in this space.
That's a good point. And then, guys, on the other side of the equation, the consumers, I think currently we've deployed roughly 10,000 EVs over the past year, and I don't know if that is kind of matching analysts. I mean, the analysts, everyone's favorite parlor game in research is how many EVs will we have on the road and how quickly do we get to 1 million and how quickly do we get to 10 million. But 10,000 is a kind of slow start out of the gate. But at the same time, it's 10,000 more than we had, and the conditions really haven't been in place. And there is this sort of chicken and egg dynamic with infrastructure and consumer education, and then am I willing to kind of go ahead of that as a consumer? But I think, there's been adequate adoption, but what is your sense of the consumer interest going forward over the next 5 years?
Well, I would think that if you looked at hybrid vehicles as an example, when they first came out, people didn't just run out and buy them. There were the early adopters that looked at them, they looked at the economics, and in some cases those economics didn't play out, but people bought them anyway. Over a decade, you suddenly have hybrids representing about 2.5% to 3% of the new vehicle market. And everyone who drives a car has driven a hybrid, and people don't really consider that to be any kind of difficult technology to deal with. I think you'll start to see the same kind of ramping in electric vehicles.
I totally agree. And you've looked at the NYC projections. So what do those numbers look like over the next 5 or 10 years?
No, like you said, but everybody's got their projection.
Yeah.
The McKinsey study looked at a low and a high case, 140,000 EVs in the low case, 230,000 in the high case by 2020, I think was the right number.
So that's good news, because that gives Con Ed 8 to 10 years to kind of get themselves ready for that. And
We'll probably need it too.
And you probably need it too. So it took the Prius 10 years to get from first generation to third generation vehicle, and it was the third generation vehicle in 2010 that really became a phenomenon. So you guys have got 8 to 10 years to prepare the city and the grid for reliability issues and for the impacts EVs have on the distribution network. And so let's talk a little bit about both charging infrastructure and about utility preparation, and kind of where are we, what are the biggest obstacles, and what do we need to do, and who's going to pay for it. So I'll let
That's pretty big.
That's a big question, but I think that's for the panel. So let's kind of talk our way through this.
Sure. So I mean, he's the grid guy, but actually, when we started off, we'd been working with Con Ed and the R&D group, and started doing some modeling on where would issues occur with certain amounts of penetration, and I think John would agree with me. It's not a systemic issue. It's in localized issues. Either it's at a particular facility where they're not outfit for so much demand, or it's a particular network. And we went based on that premise. And when we started our business, we were basing it on electric vehicle charging. And we know, just as we said, timing, it's going to take a lot of time for electric vehicles to come out. So from a business model perspective, from an infrastructure side, can we sustain that long period where it's going to take a long time for cars to be adopted? And so we focus on the localized issues by including battery storage as a mechanism at a facility to help where there may be issues with demand.
And I guess that kind of battery storage support would even be more important if you're doing level 2 and level 3, on-road charging stations where the grid maybe not is used to these kinds of impacts, and you've got issues of VAR and issues of reliability that storage can kind of buffer and mitigate.
Well, let me just try to frame orders of magnitude, right? Yeah. New York City's peak demand last summer was 13,181 megawatts of load. We have about 6 million window air conditioners that represent 2,500 megawatts of load. 2,500 megawatts of load is about 750,000 EVs at the 3.3 kilowatt chargers that current vehicles have in them. So that's the scope of the magnitude of things. So it's not a lot in terms of the total electric demand. It's the localized clustering where you get issues. If you have hotspots of a bunch of people adopt in one area, you may not have the infrastructure to handle that load. And that's where you can use storage, you can use different, green methods of handling that and balancing that load. And that can be applicable to building loads as well. Building management systems nowadays are managing the loads in buildings. It's very similar to the way we would manage the loads for EVs going forward.
That's often referred to as sort of the cul-de-sac issue, where houses or transformers are sized to have, more in suburban areas, the small distribution trash can sized transformer usually fits 4 to 6 homes. And when you start adding an EV that could have a load equivalent of 30 to 100% of a house, after you add that second or third EV on that one transformer, you're going to have a problem there. So these are the kind of grid impacts that are, at a systemic level, I think probably we're okay. I think there was a study done by Oak Ridge that if we add 10 million EVs to the US, that only increases generation capacity by half of 1%. So it looks like we're covered at a high level. So it's really the distribution grid that would kind of be the first area of struggle or challenge.
And there's that big difference between that consumer market and the cul-de-sac thing you were talking about. And John and I were discussing this earlier. If you have a big fleet user, throw in 100 vehicles in one space right away, I mean, that's what kind of power you said?
You have a megawatt
of power. So
that
creates a whole different world.
And the way the city is grown over time, your transportation areas, where the UPS is where the FedEx
right
is,
next door,
where the DHL is. So you have real concentrated transportation loads. So that's something we need to manage.
And Con Ed's sense of the challenge is it's manageable, or it's going to be creating real problems. I mean, what
it's manageable. I mean, we're working with people to develop the technology that gives us that kind of capability. Ultimately, we'd like to be able to throttle down charging rates via our control center, but to levels that the consumer would not even see the impact. So, when you have a lot of EVs, a small reduction in the energy draw for the charging can have a big impact on the total demand.
Yeah, it seems that in getting this right for consumers and for society at large, getting the pricing, getting the rate design right will be critical. And the way that generation is kind of done, or the load curve is shaped, the daytime work hours is where you have the high peaks, and then the evening are sort of the off-peak, off hours. And maybe you guys can, in Anatol, you come into this part of the discussion. What are the opportunities there, and how do we incentivize consumers or excite them to, charge off-peak? Because, we don't want a situation where everyone comes home at 6 o'clock in July when all these air conditioners are ramping and everyone's now suddenly plugging in their vehicles. So we either need technology providers that can kind of automate and, delay the charging, or we have, and I guess what we need to do is in parallel have the rates set such that, like the phone rates used to be when we had landlines, 8 p.m. is sort of off peak, and then you call your long distance across the country. So where are we with these rates, and how important are these designs?
I think all of those are critical components, and there are people on this panel who can speak much more intelligently to the technical aspects of it. But as John was mentioning, the sophistication of the current EVs combined with the sophistication of the current charging systems, and all of these issues will advance, have to be integrated into some kind of a smart grid solution. The tariffs available from the utilities will also help on the consumer side. To your point, David, on the total cost of ownership, that is a critical component, and a number of utilities nationwide have adopted that. I do think that to some extent the first few phases of adoption are going to be relatively simple. In fact, I think the EV industry is trying too hard in some cases to address issues that the consumers will have, issues of range anxiety and others, that the early adopters will be relatively comfortable with. Just to put that in perspective, if we are looking at selling 100,000 or hundreds of thousands of vehicles next year, that's in a construct of a 13.5, 14 million vehicle annual selling rate, right? So those people are unlikely buying those vehicles as their only mode of transportation. There will be people who are early adopters of other technologies who are comfortable with those initial hiccups. But all of these components, the more thought we give them, and the more we all work together on the private and public side, the smoother that adoption and the faster that adoption curve will be. And from an investor standpoint, we look at that value chain and try to figure out who are the leaders and who are the likely winners in terms of gaining meaningful market share, because in virtually every business plan that we looked at, once you get to halfway decent volumes, a lot of sins are forgiven. And the question is, who are going to be the equipment, technology providers, business models, et cetera, that can get that critical mass?
I think that's a great point. I mean, application-specific technologies we're used to that, and we have cars. We all have cars today, or a lot of people have cars today. So having it be the second vehicle, and I think the fact that 70% of the daily driving in the U.S. is under 40 miles, so there's really room for these vehicles to find niche applications, or not so niche. I mean, if your commute's less than 20 miles each way, electric vehicle can serve your purposes, and most people that live in an urban environment, New York City, are probably well within that 20-mile range. John, and for the panel, in talking about energy costs, what is it going to cost to charge an EV, or what are the numbers that you guys have looked at, and how does that compare to, gas prices today?
Well, the current flat rates in residential areas, it costs you about $2 an equivalent gallon on a 32-mile-per-gallon vehicle. So it's about half the cost. But we do have time-of-use rates. We are looking at things to help reduce some of the embedded costs associated with doing time-of-use. Today, you need a second meter. So we're looking at some technologies that may be able to reduce those costs for consumers going forward also.
And then how does that play in if you think about the total cost of ownership for an electric vehicle? Today, the average price for a new car sale in the U.S. is about $22,000, and the EVs are kind of coming. And well, there are substantial subsidies coming from the federal government, $7,500, and there's some states offering $5,000 in addition to that. But even with that, $7,500 to $12,000 roughly, kick, you're still at a higher number. So, kind of, have you guys looked at when is the payoff there in terms of the break even? How does that look? This total cost of ownership?
That varies by location, of
Sure,
course, right?
yeah.
What the rates are. We ran a model looking at a Chevy Volt, for example, and we said, typically you're making a decision based upon a comparison to something else. So in this case, we at the time I did it, I chose a 22-mile-per-gallon average internal combustion engine vehicle. I said my energy cost was 21 cents a kilowatt hour, and the assumption was that the vehicle gets 4 miles to the kilowatt hour. And in order to determine what is the premium I'm paying, I looked at the battery costs, and I said $850 a kilowatt hour. You got a 16 kilowatt hour battery pack. It's $12,800 I'm trying to make up for the upcharge for that EV. If I did 15,000 miles a year in that EV on electric, I'd pay back in 60 months. It's a push, but it's almost there.
And it's a little bit different from the fleet perspective. I mean,
absolutely.
They're looking at it first and foremost. It has to make economic sense. I mean, there's other things that they're looking at, strategies and corporate goals and those kind of things that might be driving the decision as well. But first and foremost, if it's not a good economic model for them, they're not going to adopt. Coke's a great example. They've decided to have a portion of their urban fleet electric. And first and foremost, they look at it from the model of reduced fuel and maintenance costs. And so after that, then it's the bonus things that come in that they do, they look at their brand messaging, this live positively brand messaging. It's an added bonus that they're doing good things for the environment that plays well into their corporate goals and strategies. So it is a different world when you look at the two.
Yeah. Hey, and on the fleet side of the equation, how's the federal government been in supporting fleet adoption of EVs, and are they doing enough?
Yeah, and you know what? We've been very fortunate, both at the federal level and really, here in the state and city of New York. We've had some very visionary people in both the current administration federally and under Governor Cuomo and Mayor Bloomberg to put in some incentives that will help drive this industry, drive down some costs, supply chain things. We at Smith have had both those things come into play federally and locally. The governor, maybe most of you might know, here in the state of New York, has implemented a $20,000 incentive per commercial electric vehicle for 2012. So for every vehicle that is deployed in the state, that's a pretty good incentive, and that's a good driver to help spur this industry and lower those initial capital costs for the folks. And then once that happens, then that's going to, help the supply chain and help us be able to lower that whole cost for the next generation of users. now's the national fleet guys that are jumping in, but we're really looking for that regional and local player to be able to play as well.
Right. And then so we've got federal support, we've got city support, we've got utility support. The thing I love about EVs is we're stealing revenues from the oil companies and giving it to our local utility. And I think, that's kind of a neat scenario as we shift from an oil-based civilization, hopefully, to a more electricity-based civilization. But who are the other, who's not on board, or whose support do we still need that we don't have today? What's it going to take from a policy and innovation perspective, and what are there's the batteries and the energy density issues that we haven't talked about. What are the barriers that you guys see that are really still in the way? We're all kind of just assuming yes, by 2020 it's going to happen, or maybe not. What do we need to do in 2011 and 2012 to ensure that this does happen?
Well, perhaps. At least from our perspective, it currently costs about $4,000 for what's called a level 2. It takes about 4 hours to charge a Nissan Leaf, and it's about $25,000 to $30,000 fully installed for a level 3, and those prices are coming down.
And the level 3 charges in 15 to 20 minutes?
About 30 minutes, yeah. Which is obviously is much better, but you have issues like degradation of batteries and such. But to have this type of technology out there for people to charge cars at places like retail stores and such, they don't know if they're coming. So they don't know if they want to start investing. And it's always, I know it's the typical question about, chicken or the egg, right? But in terms of investing, certainly the federal government is giving companies to give money to give infrastructure at parking garages and such to put in EV chargers. Now, we've met with a company who said, we received a free EV charger. Nobody ever charges. 3 months, nobody's ever charged. Then one person charged. We saw that. We were ecstatic, but we didn't know what to be ecstatic about. And then 3 people charged at a time, and our energy costs skyrocketed. And said we want to rip them out. We don't even know much about it. So a lot of it's education on what could happen from a cost perspective, what could happen, when people charge, and that's a big thing for us as we go in is understanding what the costs are and what the payback is for in the public realm, folks to have charging, at their sites.
Anatol, this is something you looked at, and some of the companies that you've invested in or looked at are in this charging infrastructure space. And with natural gas now kind of widely and cheaply available, and electricity prices being relatively low and stable, what's the business case for those electric vehicle charging stations, and how do we get over that kind of initial hump period?
Again, it's a time to volume issue, and we have looked at a number of charging investments and investments peripheral to that, and full disclosure, have not made an investment in that space. We haven't been able to properly handicap what will be the key success factors in that one. I will say from an industry-wide investment standpoint, I do think that the key issue on the manufacturing side is the battery. I think the platforms are by and large fine, and we have a lot of confidence that in fact they'll be in many ways more robust and will have less wear and tear, to Brett's maintenance point, than ICE platforms. The question is the battery. It costs a lot. The energy density issue, while light years ahead of where it was a decade ago, is still a major issue. And we're only in sort of the second or third year, on my numbers, of major investment in R&D in the space, again, public and private. And the other side of that, and Paul and I have talked a lot about this, is what happens to those batteries. We're, again, in very early stages of figuring out if, from a asset ownership standpoint, you have to actually take the economic value of that battery over a very short period of time, or whether there is a meaningful second and third life in that battery that will dramatically improve the economics and the total cost of ownership of the EV itself. And I think there's a great opportunity there, again, in conjunction with things like charging, things like grid support, intermittent renewable resources, et cetera. So we're looking at all of those parameters, and we think there's a great opportunity set there, but it's very early on, and volume is the key to all of these equations.
Yeah, I think two interesting points on the battery is that today it represents 50% of the cost of the vehicle, so it is a substantial, part of the purchase price. And secondly, after it's kind of expired its usable life for cars, 70% of that battery's life is still there. And that really gets into all kinds of new applications for grid support and grid storage, as we need more energy storage to support renewables that are often intermittent. So there's a neat alignment of green tech and EVs and smart grid happening, and it's really our job to figure out how it all comes together. But if the business case, it's all, we're going to trust John to it. No, but if the business case isn't there for EV chargers, is it up to the utility to install these chargers? Does Con Ed want to put level 2 chargers in my apartment, or is that never going to happen?
No, we don't install appliances.
No.
And basically, that's what it is. We bring the energy to them. But I think that the battery storage issue is an issue that, our customers are going to have different expectations going forward. If the lights go out and you have to reset your alarm clock, there's a certain amount of frustration that goes along with that. But if the lights go out and your vehicle didn't charge and you can't get to work the next day, or you can't get the kids to school, that's going to have a whole new set of expectations from the customers. And so, we've contemplated things like, can we move storage around to particular places? Will we be in a position where maybe we supply backup power to people once they've encountered that? So the future's wide open in terms of what we'll actually do with those things.
There's that secondary, life for those batteries there. You can get your own business case.
If you're in my home state of Connecticut, good windstorm comes along, you're out for 10 days.
Not here.
Good thing we don't have CLNP on the panel.
We've got a bunch of questions from the audience, and if to keep this interactive, if you have a pressing question, don't be afraid to stand up and I'll repeat it to the audience. But here's one that comes up a lot, especially as EVs are thought of as this green technology, but today we get half of our electricity in the U.S. from coal. And so the question is, how can EV owners ensure that they're not using coal as the primary fuel, or can they?
Right.
Or maybe a better question, or a different question, is what's the difference between charging on coal and charging on oil?
Well, let me...
or filling with oil.
To leave you out of this fray, let me take that. First of all, natural gas has made great strides in power generation, and even though I think everyone says half, we got to numbers of 51, 52% on an annual average basis. We're down to 45% coal. And most of that share has been taken by natural gas, which is much more efficient in terms of the conversion process and in terms of course, emissions as well. An electron's an electron. There's no way that you can actually decide which one you get and which one you don't. But the country is clearly moving to a much cleaner portfolio of generation. And the renewable portfolio standards that are implemented in 29 states are also going to contribute meaningfully to this, as well as all of the EPA promulgated rules coming down on the coal side, which will reduce the amount of coal-fired generation. Now, keep in mind, we use very little oil, minuscule amount of oil in power generation in the U.S., but keep in mind that and one of the things that really attracts us to the EV story is the drivetrain. The drivetrain itself is almost 5 times more efficient than the internal combustion engine. So even if you are getting that electron from a coal facility, you're still cleaner by the time you're at the brake horsepower level.
Yeah, the end result footprint, and the fleets are all looking at that as, okay, and regionally where that power comes from changes a little bit, but you're still much better off than you would be going with an internal combustion engine. So that's the bottom line.
Yeah, some of the research that I've seen suggests that even if you were to charge 100% on coal, which is not a possibility, and I think Anatol made a great point that we are in this sort of natural gas gold rush at the moment, with my home state, Pennsylvania, being fracked out the wazoo. But we'll leave that for another story. Leave that for another time. Even if you do use 100% coal, you still get 30% less greenhouse gas emissions to the points that were just made. So it is remarkable. But it's an excellent question. Are there questions for the audience? Oh, we got a tweet that just came in. So
hey everyone, this is Sarah from Solar One. First of all, I just wanted to give you an idea of what the online space is like. People got really excited when David said, let me find it, that EV is the killer app for smart grid. So congratulations, we got like crazy buzz about that. So nice job. So I actually have a question. It's from somebody who is in the audience right now, but he tweeted for us. It's David Baumke. And he asked, and I think it really relates to kind of what you guys were just talking about. You know, one way that we make money to fix our highways is through the gas tax. And if we end up doing a widespread adoption of electric vehicles and we end up converting away from having, you know, the gas tax being necessary, you know, how would we be able to kind of make that money for public service? Just throwing it out there if anybody knows about ideas.
Well, I'll take an initial stab at it only because I have some numbers which are interesting and relevant. Recently, New Jersey Turnpike Authority revenues are down something like 7% year to date. That has nothing to do with EVs, right? That has to do with fewer miles being driven on the highways because of economic conditions and the like. We're having a dramatic increase in CAFE standards. So in terms of collecting taxes based on the amount of fuel consumed is going to go down regardless. And, you know, the EV space would have to be wildly successful in order to even make a dent in this CAFE standard transition. So it's an issue. It's an issue that we have to think through and perhaps redesign some of the revenue mechanisms. But I think the EV contribution to that is going to be minuscule for the foreseeable future.
And I think that everybody's confident that the government will find a way to put another tax on there. So, I mean, it's,
good at that,
yeah.
Yeah, I think you framed that well. I mean, the Toyota Prius is only, or the hybrids are only 2% of the total sales today. So it'll be some time before we really take a stab out of the New Jersey Turnpike's fund, I think. Other tweets or? Oh no, I mean, I got all these cards here. So, well, there's questions like this that I think, you know, they kind of speak to the fear and concern about EVs. This one is, you know, to refuel a conventional car, it takes about 5 minutes. Will there be long lines to charge an EV? And whether or not that's like the best question, I think, and it is a good question because it represents just all these kind of like, you know, vague concerns. Another one being range anxiety. I mean, that's a real threat. And companies like AAA today are, you know, now have their first electric vehicle rescue mobile support. So
we built that, not to shameless plug.
Well done, well done. But so maybe you want to just speak about your sense of consumer fear and whether that's merited and kind of, you know, where we are with that, or if that's just a natural early, you know, part of adopting technologies.
For whatever it's worth, but this is just my opinion. But again, there are pools of applications. I live in Connecticut. I commute into the city, and all along the commuter rail lines, right, there are parking lots filled with very large cars and trucks that, by definition, drive a very short distance, sit there for a very long time, and drive a very short distance back. A lot of those cars are relatively expensive and are sitting there doing nothing but depreciating.
They're like sailboats. They're used
absolutely
very little.
pointless.
Yeah. Right.
So perfect application, and you're talking about, again, hundreds of thousands of vehicles just in the New York metro area as the addressable market. Multiply that by a fair number of cities where there is that pool of that addressable market, and you get to numbers that will make a meaningful dent in the economics and the technology of the vehicles. When we get to the point where we are charging at public stations with a queue, you know, at this point, my guess is that we will have the technology in place to charge relatively quickly, at least for some amount of range that will get you home.
And that's assuming that the battery is still the type of battery we're looking at today. You may be flowing zinc air pellets into a vehicle and sucking them out when they're used
Fusion,
up. And, yeah.
With a banana peel.
There you go.
And then I think there's also, we were talking backstage about how will consumers find the chargers because they're not used to them. And they're really kind of bland concerns, but they're real. And I think luckily, and John, you can talk to this, but luckily we have technology today with smartphones and kind of we all now use Yelp every day to figure out which restaurant to use, where it's going to be relatively easy to figure out using either car software or using phone technology where the closest charging station is, how much time until this question is about what is the service life and maintenance costs compared to conventional vehicles. And maybe you can share kind of, based on your prior comments, I mean, they're much cheaper, aren't they, to...
Yeah, and certainly, and the comment was made about just the drivetrains and the technology and things. I mean, the electric motors, those things, they just don't wear out as much. There's not as much vibration, just a lot less to go wrong. I mean, in our trucks, there's 4 moving parts in the whole vehicle, so it just inherently is going to have much less maintenance. Regenerative braking is saving the brakes. You're only changing it probably a third of the amount of time as you normally would. So typically, it's maybe 70, 75% less on the maintenance costs, at least the experiences that our folks have seen.
And here's a question that I get a lot. It's how difficult is it, or what are the costs of converting an existing car to an EV? Anyone know the numbers on that? I think what I've seen is it costs about roughly between $12,000 and $16,000 to put a battery into a non-plug-in Prius and make that a plug-in Prius. So those are the numbers that I've seen. You don't have to quote me on that, but maybe you guys have seen something different.
I mean, the hobbyists will put lead-acid batteries in and make an EV, and they can do it very economically. But
it can be done. So if you want to take your existing Volvo station wagon or Nissan non-Leaf, you can leafify that.
It won't be quite as refined a vehicle.
Okay. We have another tweet that just came in, so Sarah, take it away.
Hey, everybody. So I think this might be directed at John. I'm not exactly sure, but it's open to anyone in the audience. From Pete Rose, does New York City see the Better Place battery swap model as an effective, given the current long charging times, why or why not? So maybe you can talk a little bit about what that technology is and whether or not you think about implementing it.
I mean, the Better Place model is that you remove the battery from the vehicle, not on a daily basis, but on the occasional basis where you need to go a particular range that the battery's not capable of supplying. So they would guide you to a location where they have this facility that would change the battery out in less than 3 minutes, basically. In New York City, that's a pretty big footprint, that battery swapping station. And real estate in New York is very expensive. So we did talk to them about having a demonstration program in New York, but their decision was that they were going to go somewhere where the real estate was a little bit less expensive. I don't think they went too far. I think they're in California. So,
they're thinking about it.
Yeah. There are places where it makes perfect sense for that type of model, where you have small boundaries, countries like
Israel.
Small
countries, islands.
Yes.
Yeah.
Places like Hawaii, those things really make a lot of sense. In New York, I mean, the idea behind electric vehicles is to make use of the infrastructure capacity that you have when it's not being used. You build for the peak day. You only use that less than 10 hours a year, that peak. But you've paid for that infrastructure. So you really want to return on that investment to help keep rates down for ratepayers and to utilize your assets better. So managing when you charge, I think, probably has an overall better economic story to tell than actually swapping out the batteries to get you some more range.
Yeah, and from the fleet world, I mean, these trucks are purpose-built based on that fixed route. So it's a little bit different, dynamic where they know they're going the same place every day. They don't need to have, you know, those range anxiety pieces come into play. It's just it's able to control it based on that fixed operation.
Is that the most compelling part of the fleet story, is selling to these fleets that know exactly what they're doing? The management science and the logistics is in place to have precise measurement and scheduling. Is that the number one driver for fleets, or is it?
It is. It is
no
because
left turns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no left turns. Yeah, they can figure out exactly. They know that there's a sweet spot for them based on what they're doing. And again, as we talked about earlier, it's coming back to that economic return first, and then all the ancillary pieces will come into play after that. And it's very easy for the fleets to figure out because they're experts at it. They do it every day.
Here's a neat question that delves into the world of smart grid, and it's: please discuss the outlook for using EV as an asset for load management. And what would that be worth to Edison?
Well, we work with the Electric Power Research Institute on things like this. We're actually building a model to look at what would happen if you could aggregate hundreds of EVs and get payment for regulation. It's not something that flows to us, but through the independent system operator, there are.
And PGM has been a big supporter of frequency regulation being added to the grid now.
So there are some ancillary services that they will pay you for. It's not a big chunk of money when you really drill down into it. If you're talking residential type, you know, consumer product, and it varies by region and cost. So what we're trying to do is build a model that will predict those things for all the different independent system operators throughout the country, so that you can get some order of magnitude sense how much is really there. It doesn't look like it's a lot.
Right, because John Wellinghoff, who's the head of FERC, threw up a slide a few years back, and he called the EV the cashback car, because he thought using, you know, this concept of vehicle to grid, you'd be able to, you know, sell either power or regulation back to the grid and really, you know, not have the car pay for itself, but kind of cut into the upfront costs and make it a more valuable proposition. But we don't see that as, especially with the recession and less power being sold, there seems to be less kind of demand for that today. Is that how you see it? And also maybe do the OEMs want you kind of fussing with their batteries, or will that void the warranty of the battery if you start doing that?
Well, if you move it up and down, you're within a certain windows, it's not going to void your warranty. I mean, the cars right now can't flow power out the way they are designed today. But in the future, potentially they could. But in markets where you have heavy wind generation adoption, places like Texas, you actually get negative pricing at certain points in time.
Happens to exactly match the production tax credit.
There you go. So it depends on where you are and what the penetration of you know, different green generation choices are.
And your company is called Green Charge Network, which suggests, you know, the involvement of either wind or solar. What opportunities are you guys? That's a question here. What is the future of integrating renewables to support EVs? So, what is your sense of the deployment of? Is there enough solar to do this today? And are we going to be able to kind of do that? Whether that's garages that have panels on top of them. What's the outlook for using renewables for charging cars?
It depends upon the economics. You know, we've installed a few stations that have, or systems that have solar, and the economics are okay. They're not great. And until those economics come down, we continue to work on the integration of renewables with a battery and the electric vehicle charger to kind of take advantage of the system costs. In places like Texas or Seattle, sure. In places like New York, where I think there's something like 1,000 sun hours a year, I don't know. You know, so in terms of that, we're working on it, but the economics aren't fantastic.
Okay, here's a question. Doesn't it make more economic sense to focus on EVs in low electricity cost areas rather than expensive electricity areas like New York City?
Well, you get a better return faster, certainly, but if you can get on a mile per gallon basis, if you can get your fuel for half the cost of your fossil fuel, it still has a benefit.
part of the challenge of reading the audience questions is that some of the members of the audience's handwriting isn't so hot.
Hey, David, I can bring in with a Twitter question if you want. All right. Hey, everybody. This is actually a really great one from EV New York. So there are currently 48 gas stations in New York City compared to 40 charging stations. What do you guys think that ratio will look like in 5 years? Maybe future prospecting. I don't know if you guys have looked at that. And then we actually had a comment about that. Michael Johnson Chase asked, where are those 40 charging stations? I'd like to know where they are.
There are apps online where you can find the charging stations.
The city has a website too. It
Yeah.
should be plugged, and it's got a lot of education and stations to look at as well.
I think within a year we'll bypass the number of liquid fuel stations in the city with charging stations in the city. I don't know.
Are there any other last questions? We got time for one more question. So if someone has a pressing question, you can speak up. Otherwise, oh, there's one.
Question more for John. Have you looked at what the electric vehicle potential is? Have you looked at what the electric vehicle potential is in New York City in light of the fact that the grid is pretty much designed to cool down at night when you would most likely be charging your vehicles?
Mm-hmm.
So what sort of grid infrastructure, what's going to grow faster? Which needs to happen first? The grid infrastructure to support the overnight charging, or more, we've got plenty of grid potential, we now have to just, the cars have to come and meet that demand?
Well, we looked at the cool down issue associated with transformers because they do extend their life if they have a cool down period. So there was some work done with all the utilities looking at what kind of aging that would be. And on a 25 kilowatt pole type transformer in, a suburban type area, about 4 EVs will cut the life of that transformer by about 30%. So that's pretty substantial. But that's assuming that all of those EVs are on at full draw at the same time. So that's where you can get into throttling some of the charging management scenarios we talked about before. And if you can look at what your load on your transformer is and throttle the loads being drawn by the chargers in conjunction with whatever the house loads are to begin with, you can start to manage that, which is very similar to the type of systems that we've done in demonstration through some DOE grants, where you're looking at the load on a business and you have maybe photovoltaics and storage, and you're managing demand. So it's really the same scenario, and in the end, I think a lot of it's going to be managed via software controls.
If the city basically owns the waterfront, and so there's not a real estate cost issue, is there any venture happening from the city to have charging stations that use hydro, solar, sources other than oil and gas, any other kind of renewable?
I can't speak for the city, but I know that we've looked at things like Verdant Power, where they have some generation in the river and have given thought to potentials in those applications.
Okay, looks like we've got to wrap it up. So I was actually on the Drive Electric City website that Keith mentioned earlier today, and it says electric cars are some of the city's newest residents, and we think they'll fit right in. With their help, we can say, forget about it to gasoline prices and oil dependence. So with that, I'd like to thank our wonderful group of panelists here and our sponsors, NYCERDA, Con Ed, and Loeb, and let's give them a warm round of applause.
We will start the networking. So the panelists will be up here to answer any of your questions. We've got beer and wine in the bank. And again, thank you so much. It's been a great year for Clean EC. We can't wait for next year. Awesome.